much. Good morning. Buenos dias. It's working? Yes. Once again, I'm really delighted to have you all here face to face in Cancun. As I mentioned, the aviation stakeholders are getting together under one roof is a great signs that we are on the recovery process. Our environment is still a little bit challenged considering the travel restrictions that we have in different parts of the world. And for the aviation industry, it's crucial to our financial health that we really have some passengers coming through our buildings and of course to restore the whole aviation ecosystem. As I mentioned, 70% of our members, more than 70% of our members support our airline partners and our partners in other parts of the industry as well during the pandemic. That is the right thing to do because we are an ecosystem and we all desire the respect and support to continue to grow. And of course, that makes certain claims from IATA that the airports are not being supportive during this pandemic out of the context. And unfortunately, that is the not right approach, especially in the recovery time when we all need to work together as a whole aviation ecosystem on this recovery. In fact, we are critical infrastructure assets, and to be sustainable and resilient, of course, we need to do a lot in terms of overseeing the current charges system and the model that we have. In the good times, when you have a lot of passengers, charge goes down. In the bad times, when the charge needs to be up because of the low number of passengers, we are attacked by some of these partners that I mentioned. We need to revisit this economic model and be more fair with the whole aviation ecosystem as well. Again, aviation is an ecosystem. When you continue to talk about that, COVID is a crisis that put us a lot of pressure, and we need to rebuild, to reconnect aviation and sustainable aviation business for the future. And we are the first international organization to reach the net zero carbon emissions agreement goal by 2050. That was followed by the airlines and other stakeholders of the industry. Well, just like the recovery, collaboration and cooperation again is how to reach the goals with aviation stakeholders, partners, and of course the governments. This makes in person even especially important because meeting in person will strengthen the collaboration and determination for all the aviation stakeholders and governments to work together to meet these goals so we can continue responsible and sustainable delivery of social and economic developments of this industry for the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Felipe. I now would like to pass the floor to Mr. Martin Eurnekian, CEO of Corporación America Airports, President of Aeropuertos in Argentina 2000, and Chair of the ACI World Board.
Thank you very much. Once again, it's a true pleasure to be here. Buenos días a todos, es un placer estar en persona acá. Aviation is recovering from its worst crisis in its history. And as Felipe mentioned, the fact that we are here in person is a real milestone in an industry's path to recovery. Indeed, this is among the first global aviation events to take place in 2021. We are advancing in the recovery together, and we must stick together as airports, governments, and other stakeholders in the interlinked ecosystem that is aviation. I am proud to say that ACI has continued to actively support its members on its journey to recovery, from advocacy to international bodies like ICAO, to providing critical resources, programs, and guidance. It has stood up as the voice of the world's airports when airports needed a collective voice more than ever, and we will continue to do so. Thankfully, despite lingering challenges, we are seeing positive signs in the right direction. As mentioned, borders are gradually reopening, and ACI will continue to advocate to governments for pragmatic and risk-based approaches to facilitate the resumption of travel. Despite this good news, the financial strain is still heavily impacting airports as traffic remains significantly lower. And this needs to be taken into account as we support a recovery that is fair for the entire aviation ecosystem. Overall, the industry is determined to rebuild a sustainable future propelled by the airports industry's net zero goal. As I said earlier, environmental, social, and economic viability must be at the forefront of our business decisions. This will be our way going forward. We will rebuild back together so the industry can be part of a sustainable future, continue to deliver social and economic benefits to the world. I look forward to the rest of the event so we can continue to advance this together. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Martín. Ahora me gustaría presentar a Andrew O'Brien, director general de Reach Airports y presidente de la Junta Directiva de ACI LAC.
Buenos días a todos. Bienvenido a Cancún y a México. Good morning and welcome to the 2021 ACI LAC World Annual General Assembly Conference and Exhibition. Nice to be here with members of the press. Latin America Caribbean airports are recovering steadily and relatively fast as compared to the rest of the world. For example, traffic in September of 2021, when we compare that to 2019, was just 34% below 2019 levels. That means to say on the positive side that it was relatively in the neighborhood of 65% of 2019 traffic in September of 2019, we were able to achieve in September of 2021, and that's only second to recovery rates in the United States. Of course, there are some market differences between countries. We've still got a dizzying array of restrictions, different requirements in different jurisdictions here in the region that we at ACI continue to work closely with our partners, with our airport members, with governments in the region to try and come to more harmonization among requirements for travel. Countries without restrictions, no doubt when I talk about that recovery figure, they're generally the ones whose traffic is recovering faster. Some of those examples are here in Mexico, República Dominicana, Dominican Republic, and Colombia. And worldwide, you should all know that Mexico was the only country worldwide that did not impose any COVID-related restrictions. Hence the reason why this event is being held here in Cancun. Some key Mexican airports are already exceeding 2019 passenger levels by over 20%. Our ACI members, ASUR, GAP, OMA, and Mexico City are successfully getting back to business. Despite that, it's important that you all understand that it's quite difficult for many airports that operate in the 3P environment throughout the entire Latin America Caribbean region. We have some of the highest penetration in this region of what I would call public-private participation projects, or 3P, Alianza Pública Privada. And there are some exceptions, but in general it's been very difficult for airport operators and investors in this region to achieve any kind of economic equilibrium. And there's been quite a bit of difficult conversation around that, but certainly our position at ACI and ACI LAC is to support our airport members to continue dialogue and to look for a way to find that all-important economic equilibrium in their contracts. You should know that throughout the pandemic, Latin America and the Caribbean's member airports have supported a great deal our airline customers and partners and airport concessionaires who run activities such as food and beverage, duty-free, and other sub-concessions at the airport. And we've never stopped operating during the pandemic. You know that although it may have not been the most profitable venture, the LAC airports were among some of the first to open and start to connect during the pandemic. And of course, we played a major role in repatriation flights of thousands and thousands of people in the region that were trying to get out of specific countries and get back home. And from a sanitary point of view, Latin American Caribbean airports behaved responsibly. We implemented strict protocols to ensure compliance with international regulations. And in fact, worldwide, Latin American and Caribbean airport members were the fastest to implement ACI's Airport Health Accreditation program. And one other note, we were the only region worldwide that successfully concessioned airports during the pandemic. Round 6 in Brazil went ahead with regards to regional airports in the state of Sao Paulo. And in conclusion, I'd like to mention to you as members of the press that never in history have we faced an industry-wide emergency like this, and it has really incentivized us as airports like never before, and our airline partners, and our world business partners, to work shoulder to shoulder, mano a mano, to collaborate and develop creative, mutually beneficial solutions to the crisis. And obviously I'm speaking of very important matters like climate change, which we are currently trying to tackle. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Andrew. Ahora me gustaría pasar la palabra a Rafael Echevarne, director general de ACI LAC.
Hola, buenos días a todos. Muchas gracias por su asistencia. ¿Lo hacemos en inglés o en español? ¿En español? Ok. Entonces, bueno, voy a hablarlo en español para aquellos medios de la región. Para ilustrar un poquito más con algunos números lo que acaba de decir el señor O'Brien. Bueno, durante los 2 años que ha durado la pandemia, desde el inicio de la pandemia hasta ahora, los aeropuertos de América Latina han perdido 775 millones de pasajeros. Eso es más que lo que en todo un año se gestionaba antes de la pandemia. En cuanto a ingresos, la reducción de los ingresos ha sido del orden de los 13 billones, 12,6 billones de dólares menos en ingresos que antes de la pandemia, durante todo este periodo del 2020-2021. Durante este periodo, 12,6 billones menos. Como decía el señor O'Brien, el 34% por debajo de los números del 2019, es lo que tenemos ahora, al final del mes de septiembre, pero con unas grandes variaciones entre países. Como mencionaba también, México, al ser el único país en el mundo que no impuso ningún tipo de restricción, es de los países, sino probablemente el país que se está recuperando con más rapidez. De hecho, tenemos ya aeropuertos en México, sobre todo los aeropuertos de Tijuana, donde en octubre el tráfico estuvo un 22% por encima de los niveles del 2019. Y en el aeropuerto de Cancún, en octubre, el tráfico fue un 12% por encima de los niveles del 2019. Eso es un mensaje muy claro que queremos transmitir a las autoridades, y es que las restricciones, las imposiciones, las cuarentenas, obviamente matan la demanda. Es así de sencillo. Lo que podemos decir también es que los aeropuertos que están recuperándose lo están haciendo de una forma muy responsable y muy segura. No conocemos de ningún brote de COVID que se haya dado en ningún aeropuerto y obviamente en ninguna compañía aérea, porque se han implementado medidas sanitarias que cumplen con todos los protocolos que se recomendaron tanto por la OACI, que es la máxima autoridad internacional de aviación, como la Organización Mundial de la Salud y los propios protocolos que nuestra organización puso en marcha. Y como decía el señor O'Brien, América Latina precisamente fue la región que implementó estas medidas antes que ninguna otra del mundo. Mirando al futuro, bueno, también lo decía antes, el transporte aéreo es absolutamente fundamental para nuestra región, para el desarrollo social y económico. No es ningún lujo, es una necesidad, porque no tenemos ninguna otra alternativa en cuanto al transporte. Debido al tamaño geográfico, el tamaño de los países, la geografía, la orografía, no tenemos las redes de ferrocarriles, los trenes de alta velocidad que se dan en Europa, las autopistas que se encuentran en Estados Unidos. Eso no existe aquí, con lo cual el transporte aéreo es fundamental, no solamente para atraer turistas, lo cual contribuye muchísimo a las economías, sino para la vida del día a día de nuestros ciudadanos. Entonces, mirando al futuro, vemos que hay un crecimiento, va a haber un crecimiento, no se llegará a estos niveles o sea, para llegar a los niveles que proyectábamos antes de la pandemia, probablemente se retrasarán 2 o 3 años debido a esta recuperación que estamos pasando, pero para que de forma ilustrativa, en el 2019 tuvimos 683 millones de pasajeros en esta región y en el 2040, justo antes de la pandemia, proyectábamos 1.6 billones, 1.600 millones de pasajeros. ¿Se dará en el 2040? Probablemente sí o probablemente no, porque dependerá de con qué rapidez nos recuperamos, pero sabemos que se va a llegar a ese nivel de pasajeros y para eso hace falta invertir. Hace falta invertir en nuevos aeropuertos y también ampliación de aeropuertos existentes. Y proyectamos 94 billones de dólares en inversiones en infraestructura de ahora al 2040, de las cuales 41 billones son en nuevas infraestructuras, en lo que llamamos proyectos Greenfield Projects, ¿de acuerdo? Y para concluir, la pandemia ha demostrado muy claramente que es necesaria la colaboración entre los países y sobre todo, además de la colaboración, la armonización en los protocolos, que, seamos sinceros, no se ha trabajado con la rapidez que era necesaria. Ahora está pasando, pero eso es una de las lecciones, armonizar, colaborar. Una de las cosas que también he hecho hincapié es en la importancia de reconsiderar muchas de las estructuras con las que estábamos trabajando hasta ahora. Y un punto que mencionaba yo es la liberalización, absolutamente fundamental para proporcionar la flexibilidad que es necesaria para que cualquier compañía de cualquier país de América Latina pueda volar libremente. Eso es un tema que no estamos trabajando, que no se ha mencionado mucho, pero que esta pandemia ha demostrado que si tuviéramos esa flexibilidad, la capacidad de recuperación sería mucho más rápida. Y por último, la importancia de la ciencia y la tecnología. Desafortunadamente no se ha hecho mucho caso a la ciencia, por eso todavía tenemos unas limitaciones operacionales que están poniendo un freno a esa recuperación. Por ejemplo, en Perú se están imponiendo restricciones operacionales por querer mantener esa distancia entre los pasajeros, que sabemos además que es imposible de implementar, porque los aeropuertos no están diseñados para tener 1,5 metros o 2 metros de distancia entre los pasajeros. Es imposible, no puede ser, es totalmente fuera de lugar. Eso no quiere decir que no sea seguro. Sabemos que el uso de las mascarillas y los protocolos de limpieza que se han implementado son absolutamente suficientes y hemos demostrado, como decía antes, con el hecho de que no ha habido ningún tipo de brote. Entonces, la ciencia y la tecnología son nuestros grandes aliados y animamos a los países de la región a que implementen nuevos sistemas tecnológicos que se han hablado hoy también, por ejemplo, el uso de reconocimiento facial y demás, que por cierto, algunos aeropuertos de nuestra región son líderes a nivel mundial. Estoy pensando, por ejemplo, en el aeropuerto de Montevideo, en Uruguay. La implementación de los sistemas tecnológicos ahí son de nivel mundial, punteros a nivel mundial. Y obviamente todo esto dentro del marco de la sostenibilidad. Y de nuevo, una cosa muy importante, nuestra región, mucha gente no lo sabe, somos líderes en cuanto a aeropuertos verdes. Un buen ejemplo, 2 buenos ejemplos. En Ecuador, el aeropuerto de Galápagos, un aeropuerto con emisiones neutras. Y, por ejemplo, el aeropuerto de Quito y el aeropuerto de Guayaquil está haciendo grandes esfuerzos y de hecho, el aeropuerto de Quito también está a lo que llamamos nivel 3 en el Airport Carbon Accreditation. 2 aeropuertos, como digo, que son líderes a nivel mundial. Muchas gracias.
All right, thank you very much. We'll now take some questions here. As mentioned, we can take the questions in the Spanish or English. If you're in the room, please announce what outlet you are with, followed by the question. If you're on Zoom, please submit your question to the email provided earlier, info@aci-lac.aero. We will answer as many as we can. We have a few minutes to answer some questions, so does anyone want to get started in the room?
Buen día, Rafael de Infobae de Buenos Aires. Quería preguntarle, no soy un periodista que siga habitualmente el sector, pero es evidente que hay una fuerte tensión entre las aerolíneas y los aeropuertos. Lo hemos escuchado aquí en los mensajes y sabemos que días anteriores también hubo desde el lado de las aerolíneas también algunos mensajes en ese sentido. Quería preguntarle a cualquiera qué reflexión les merece y cuáles son los motivos desde el punto de vista de ustedes de esa tensión.
Mira, yo para empezar, como comenté, más del 70% de nuestros miembros apoyaron las aerolíneas durante la pandemia. Nosotros como aeropuertos no paramos durante toda la pandemia, no es posible devolver un terminal o devolver una infraestructura, ¿no? Entonces nosotros no paramos y conseguimos siguiendo y manteniendo los aeropuertos funcionales durante toda la pandemia. Sabemos que las aerolíneas alrededor del mundo tuvieron más de 250 mil millones de dólares, 250 billion dólares en ayuda de los gobiernos, y nosotros no tuvimos la misma suerte. Además, nosotros cooperamos mucho durante todo el proceso y seguimos los marcos regulatorios. Entonces, no es que haya una tensión entre aerolíneas y aeropuertos, porque nuestros partners son las aerolíneas y no hay un aeropuerto sin una aerolínea y no hay una aerolínea sin un aeropuerto, ¿no? Y al final, lo que tenemos que ver es que necesitamos los pasajeros, los dos, para seguir creciendo. Y ese es un tema que realmente nos afecta, no porque no estamos haciendo, no porque las aerolíneas no reconocen, pero sí las mensajes que normalmente vienen de IATA generalizando que todos los aeropuertos del mundo no colaboran con la recuperación. Los aeropuertos costan menos de 5% de los costos de una aerolínea. Entonces, nosotros no somos el gran caso que genera una pérdida a una aerolínea, pero sí hay otras cosas más importantes, como personal, como combustible, que quizás son factores que las aerolíneas no pueden o no quieren atacar en el momento. Entonces, nosotros como una pequeña parte del costo total de una aerolínea no podemos ser considerados el factor de riesgo de una aerolínea en vida. Entonces, creo que es el gran tema de cómo manejamos, cómo apoyamos los miembros, cómo apoyamos nuestros socios estratégicos, que son las aerolíneas, y cómo muchas veces la Asociación de Aerolíneas nos ataca de una forma que no es coherente y hace con que la opinión pública perciba a nosotros como los villanes del tema, y realmente queremos demostrar que no es el caso.
Bueno, quería decir que es importante también apuntar que durante la pandemia hemos trabajado muy de cerca también con las compañías aéreas. Aquí en la región, por ejemplo, la relación entre IATA y ACI y otros players del transporte aéreo ha sido excepcional. Nunca habíamos trabajado tan de cerca y con un objetivo común, que era la reapertura del transporte aéreo. O sea que eso también es importante resaltar, que cuando es necesario también colaboramos. Y aquí hemos colaborado muy de cerca en América Latina, y ya te digo, hemos tenido montones de comunicados conjuntos haciendo un llamamiento a los países para que reabran las fronteras, para que tengan unas posiciones comunes en cuanto a lo que mencionaba antes, la armonización, la colaboración y demás. O sea, no es que tengamos esa tensión constante, ni mucho menos. En América Latina, como digo, hemos trabajado muy de cerca también.
Okay, we'll have to go to the next question. This gentleman in the front was before.
Good morning still. I have a question. I'm from ALA News. My name is Jeff Beat, and I have a question for you, Mr. Eurnekian, because I just read your exchanges with the Argentine press, and your assessment of the aviation industry is accurate in terms of the astonishing gaps between countries in Latin America, the way they're facing the crisis. Do you see any sign of collaboration between Latin American nations to confront the challenges of the industry together? Meaning, what one country, like you mentioned, Uruguay, is doing should be done by others, or is any other country interested in maybe, going down that path? And the other thing is, I've been to a few conferences in the last year and a half, I think all of them that we and we keep hearing, you know, what governments need to do, and the way you've shown that the industry is safe, and it is safe. Have you thought of elevating this consideration to a more political field? Let's say to any of the fora that Latin American countries have, where you could present the case that the aviation industry, it is extremely needed in the region because of connectivity, because of all that, and at the same time it should be addressed, its concerns, by, you know, at least a group of countries, if not the region as a whole.
Thank you for your question. Well, the aviation industry, as you probably know, it's a very complex ecosystem with a lot of different actors that have their own complexity, and I think that each of these actors is very much willing to work together, but there are a lot of challenges facing that ability to harmonize, as Rafael put it. And on the other side, as you pointed out, we have the governments. We have a very complex region in Latin America because although we have some trading blocks, we do not have any organizations that can harmonize in terms of regulations. And this is a barrier for the growth of the intra-Latin American aviation industry. And this is what many of our colleagues in the industry are asking for, but it's a tremendous challenge to be able to bring to the table governments to be able to harmonize measures for Latin America. And I think this was seen or heard much louder during the pandemic, when harmonization was key for recovery, and we really could not be up to the challenge in terms of a region to be able to harmonize measures for travel. You know, we have been always asking governments to try to find a common approach, and we could not do it. Basically, as a passenger during the pandemic, you had to make a very complex study to be able to understand the requirement of each country and each airline to be able to travel, and this is really against the growth of this industry. So I think those two challenges are there. Everybody is willing to collaborate on this, but the complexities around it, I think, hasn't allowed us to reach that harmonization level.
Is there any plan to address it from a political perspective, maybe ACLAC or, you know, one of these fora where you could bring the interest of the
Well, I will let Rafael or Felipe talk, but ACI for Airports is the voice on all of these forums to be able to try to convince or create such an environment. And we are all working on it. ALTA is doing a great work. IATA is doing a great work. But the complexity is there, and I think that if we are going to learn something from this pandemic, is that we need to be ready for a future disruption. If a next pandemic or a next big disruption comes along, be a shame if we're not ready and if we didn't learn anything from this.
Rafael, you have anything to add?
Well, I mean, as Mr. Eurnekian says, we actually have put forward in all the different fora in this part of the world, you know, the need for harmonization. But as he says, you know, this is very complex. I mean, you just have to look at the situation even in Europe. You know, being a common bloc, each country went its way. Okay, within the United States, you have different states with different, approaches. So it is very complex. I mean, obviously, you too, the governments, they have their own politics, they have their own pressures, you know. So it is extremely complicated, the whole thing. We were hoping that with this pandemic, we wouldn't commit the mistakes that we actually implemented after September 11th. A very similar situation actually occurred. A very similar situation, and we were actually, both actually IATA and ACI, we were sending a message, please let us not make the same mistake by going on each of us in our own way. It is a very complex thing, you know, no one ever thought about this. We understand, you know, that it was a very difficult situation, but yeah, we should learn. Second time running, you know, for the next one.
Just to comment on that as well, I won't extend too much the discussion, but if you see that we are working very close with ICAO that represent the states take decisions on cart that is to be implemented by the whole countries in the world, and even then they are not able to implement their measures. What we prove as ACI, as an airport industry, we are able to implement the measures and harmonize the systems globally, and I think the good example is the airport health accreditation that was mentioned many times, even by the Secretary General as well. And that's a way that you can take the cart, take the government decisions, and how we can implement in different parts of the world.
All right, thank you. I think we have another question, gentleman over there. If you can just announce your outlet as well.
Good morning, Silvio Spinatelli from Agência Estado, News Agency in São Paulo, Brazil. Well, you mentioned that airports have supported air companies. I'd like to understand better what does it mean, what kind of support, could you give more color on that? And especially in financial terms, did you give some kind of support in financial terms?
As I can start it, a little bit. What we mentioned financial support is like a reduction of the charges for restarting the industry is one of the measures. In certain airports, we're not charging the parking of the aircrafts during the pandemic as well. And in addition, of course, passenger fees and others that was waived during the pandemic. And as I mentioned, the aviation is an ecosystem, it's not only the airlines. We need to talk about the 60% of the jobs that are included in the whole airport sector. That's why the industry sector, 60% of jobs are inside of the airports. That's why all the concessionaries that we also support during the pandemic, talking about restaurants, ground handling, and others that also need the support because they are part of the aviation ecosystem. I don't have the clear picture, but talking with some airports that is difficult to mention the names of the airports because they're own business, but some airports numbers are very huge. And one airport in the region, for example, for one airline only was around $140 million of incentives and reduction of the cost it was providing during the pandemic. So one airport, if you multiply, we have 2,000 airports in the world. Of course, none of them are the same in terms of the size and in terms of the measures that will take, but that's, I think, is one example that we would like to share. I don't know if my colleagues would like to add something as well.
I think there were, certainly in the Latin America, Caribbean region, many of our airport members, without mentioning any specifically, but throughout the pandemic, I was the CEO of an airport in South America. And, we really tried to work with the airline partners to understand their needs, and that was most important, just listen to them. In fact, what we found is that most of the airlines weren't asking us directly as airports to eliminate charges. They were asking for coordination and collaboration. Remember, at the start of the pandemic, there was tremendous confusion on how to operate. So it was about how can we operate together? How can we implement policies and protocols together? How can we harmonize what you're doing in the airport to make it safe for the passenger with what we need to do on board? So this is why I mentioned in my comments and in the speech this morning that this is the first time in history, even much more, Jeff, than 911. I mean, this was a mega crisis that we had to manage. And I think what we always like to focus on with our airline partners is how much we've collaborated and how much we've come together. Now, you asked about specifics related to some type of incentive. Look, we're partners in the business. We provide the infrastructure for them to fly, and then the passengers get on the planes and they fly. There were cases in the region where some airports were able to provide short-term deferral of payments. For example, an airline needs to have an office at the airport. So some of these airlines came forward and said, look, I need to reschedule my flights or my repatriation flights. We would help with all that logistics and organization, and I need a few months to be able to figure out this crisis, and we need some support in that short term for office rents. Some of it was deferral, some of it was a straight up cancellation of that fee. It depended on the airline, it depended on the relationship and what their needs were. So I think the message we want to leave you with here today, members of the press, is that we are extremely conscious and we're always very close to our airlines and our airline partners throughout this. And I mentioned other world business partners, duty-free shops, restaurants, bars, everything that makes up an airport city. And let's not forget about the cargo industry. We were there with them working hand in hand together to make a successful response to a global pandemic. And I think when you weigh all that out, the airlines and the airports have worked very well together.
If I may add, because this is a very hot topic, obviously, just even before the pandemic, just for you to know, airports compete with each other to attract airlines. So incentives, discounts, that's a normal part of the business. That happens all the time, constantly, all right? Because, you know, airports need the airlines, okay? So they actually constantly talk to them. They offer them all sorts of things for these airlines to fly in. So this is something that is absolutely normal. It goes on forever, and as Andrew says, now even more, okay, to actually support during this time.
Okay, well, thank you. I think we'll have to wrap it up there because they've already started downstairs. If you need to follow up, myself or Carla can help you out with further questions. But thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us online. And we'll see you at the next press conference later today for CITA, if you're able to.